Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 178. So in this episode, we are going to talk about when to leave your relationship. Some of you I know are burning to know the answer to this question. So I'm going to help answer that for you and even give you a sort of outline for a conversation you can have with your spouse to help you really know if it's time to move on or if you have a real chance of making this relationship, this marriage, into a good or even great one. Because just because things might be feeling hard right now doesn't mean the answer is clear about what to do. Whether to stay or whether to go, right? I know that because I have been there. But before we dive into that, I want to remind you that 7 days from the release of this episode, so that's January 15th, is when doors close to coach with me one-to-one for the next 6 to 9 months. So get started now or wait many months. There are also changes coming to this podcast as well, but I'm going to let you know in a separate announcement about that soon. In any case, don't wait. If you're a deep feeling or a sensitive woman and you're less than totally happy in your marriage, come coach with me in a deeply, individually tailored way for the next 4 months and end our time together with a very different, much more love and connection filled marriage. If you want to see other women's experiences of doing this work with me, check out the testimonials on my website. I'll put that direct link and the link to learn more about coaching with me and getting started in the show notes, or you can find it over at hspmarriagecoaching.com. But the doors close January 15th, so that gives you very little time to sign up. And I really don't recommend waiting because there is this tendency when we put off working on our marriage for it to get harder, for things to get worse, not better over time. So get the help that will change everything in your marriage for this so much better. All right. So many women, and perhaps you as well, want to know, as I certainly did in my first marriage, when do I know I should leave my marriage? When do I know it's unfixable? The truth is, it absolutely is better for you to know one way or the other versus not looking at it at all, right? Like, of course, you want to go forward and live your life in the best way possible, whether it's in this relationship or not. So I know that sometimes facing this and looking at this can feel hard, but I want you to know it's well worth it because you don't want to stay in an unhappy place in your marriage forever, right? One of the worst places to be emotionally is in uncertainty, is in confusion, is in a stuck place between staying and going. If you're there right now, you absolutely know what I mean. I personally know because I was there for a couple or a few years myself in my first marriage. When you feel too unhappy in your relationship to know that you want to stay and too scared and unsure it's the right thing to do to actually leave, that's hard. Right? What if your spouse can improve? What if you can connect in the deeper ways you want? What if you can't? What if he can't? Yeah? It can be really paralyzing and spirit killing. So I don't want you to stay stuck there. I don't want you to even ever have to get to that stuck place. So I want to share how to know when to leave. I mean, it's a huge topic and there are whole books written and even whole months-long programs made on this topic. And there really isn't a one-size-fits-all answer because each relationship is unique, each life path is unique, and there are no cookie-cutter answers here. So I'm not going to try to cover everything by any means, But what I will share with you entails a bit of a process, which is guaranteed to leave you in a much more clear place, because diving into a full process is the truest and really only way to know for sure one way or the other if leaving or staying is the best thing for you and your marriage and your unique life situation. I personally think that we live in a culture that is way too hasty to say, leave him. That is way too hasty to skip over giving our partners, especially our male partners, a real chance. Our popular culture approach seems to kind of let us as women off the hook of doing our own work to improve our marriage, or at least just expects a tiny bit from us, like the expression of, I'm feeling disconnected, honey, or the complaint of, I'm unhappy. As if that's enough to help our spouses many of whom were never taught how to be great partners, right? As if that was enough to help our spouses know how to show up for us as the amazing partner we've always wanted. As if we have nothing to do with the quality of our relationship, as if how we communicate and how we show up and how we interact has nothing to do with the quality of our relationship. As if it's all on our spouse to be the perfect, idealized partner we women have come to expect, have even come to demand. As if we were helpless as women, as if we were powerless and aren't able to lead and guide the relationship into being one that both we and our significant other feel very fulfilled in. I think we all know in our hearts that this isn't true, of course, that we don't have that power, that we have nothing to do with it. That's not true, and I think we all know this. But it's hard when it's the message that we tend to hear and absorb from our culture. When the message we predominantly hear is that our happiness depends on how well our male partners show up, which to me honestly just seems like giving the male so much more power than necessary, as we all have done for eons. And the truth is, we as women have huge influence, huge sway, huge power to make our relationships with our partner so much better. And I know that you do have some or even a lot to do with the quality of your marriage, even if you can't fully see exactly how and where you affect things. I know that you know that just leaving isn't necessarily the fair answer, at least not hastily. And of course, I believe we women deserve to have a great marriage, especially if we're willing to put in the energy and attention that it takes. And I don't want women to stay in marriages that feel bad or even kind of blah, right? Like, we do only have this one life, and deep love and a connected, intimate relationship is one of the best, most delicious, nourishing, joyful experiences we can have in this life. And I want that for you if that's something you want. So if you aren't experiencing anything close to that, it is important to have a sense of when to move on so you don't spend all your life in an unhappy marriage. It's important also to your own sense of integrity, which I know is so important to you, to do what you can from your end of things to make things as good as possible in your marriage. Yes. So, what do I say to people who want to know when it's time to leave? First, please know that you can leave if you just really want to. It doesn't make you a better human to stay if that isn't what your heart really wants. You don't have to have huge problems to leave. And don't believe anyone who's guilting you into believing you do. If leaving is what you want, please do follow your heart. It won't serve you or your partner to stay if you just don't want to. But I honestly have found that that is rare. Most of the time we do want to stay with the person we love, even if there's some unhappiness or a lot of unhappiness, even if we haven't figured out how to live and be together in the most fulfilling, loving ways yet. So, when else should you leave? In my expert opinion, you should leave after you've done your own work in a deep way. I mean, after you've done your own work on you in regards to the relationship. And after you've communicated what you want from your spouse thoroughly, kindly, with belief in them, with a willingness to support them in supporting you, and in a way that sells your spouse on what's in it for them. So that was a mouthful, and I want to break all of this down for you over the rest of this episode. And I'm even going to give you a script, a sort of script, not an exact script, but a guideline for a conversation you can have around all this with your spouse. But let's start breaking down what your work is. What is your own work? Ultimately, your work is to be the spouse you want him to be. You want your spouse to be. Your work is to show up as you wish your spouse would in your ideal world. And to do this not for just a few days, but for many months in a way that feeds you instead of depletes you. So what that means is you're not faking it so that you burn out. You're not faking kindness and love and affection. You're literally feeling those things and living them out. You're doing what it takes to grow into the emotionally resourced partner who can meet her own emotional needs and love unrestrictedly, who can act out and live out her love for her spouse from that full, deep well inside of herself. A well that she knows how to fill without relying on her partner to fill it for her. So what does all of that mean? Yes, it's a beautiful question. And of course, the answer is much more involved than what I can share on this episode at this moment. But it really does mean so much of what I've talked about already on this whole podcast. There are many, many episodes that touch on various aspects of doing this work on yourself. But I'm going to touch briefly on some of what this entails right now. So what this work entails is taking responsibility for how you bring things to the relationship that make it more painful and disappointing for yourself, like idealized expectations and the anger that comes from them, which many of us tend to direct at our spouse. So doing your work to end that is a huge part of this work. It means also learning all that you can and doing all that is in your own power from your end of things to become the best possible partner, to lead love, to stay in your heart, to understand your partner's pains and patterning and the things that have led to them being how they are, the less than perfect partner that they are, and why it isn't simply your partner's fault, but his inheritance, his painful inheritance from his family, from his culture. Many of the behaviors that you don't like come from that. And it means doing the three things that I talk about a lot that develop your full emotional agency and lead to awesome relational skills. And those are, 1, knowing how to intentionally move through and out of negative emotion. And I did not say not have negative emotion or avoid negative emotion, but rather know how to not fall prey to unnecessary negative emotion and know how to move through and out of any of it that does arise. Knowing how to do that on your own without depending on your spouse to do things that makes that easy for you. Number 2, knowing how to intentionally move into emotions that are conducive to love and connection, that foster love naturally between you and your spouse. And 3, I'm not saying these in order. I actually usually say these in a different order. But the last piece of this is to learn how to love and believe in yourself deeply in a way most women have not yet done, so that you can stop relying on your spouse to give you what they may not be able to give consistently or at all, and can instead insource those needs, those emotional needs in a nourishing, deep way, and or get them met elsewhere, because no one person is supposed to be the source of your emotional wellness. So I know that was a super quick review, but I do talk about this in many episodes, or many aspects of this in various episodes. But I highly recommend you check out episode 105 specifically, and that's called The 3 Simple Things You Must Be Able to Do to Have an Amazing Marriage. And another recent episode that speaks to some of this is episode 163. It's called The Practice of Great Relationship. In any case, I also like to think about this as there's the 4 levels that we have to do our own work on inside of ourselves. And those levels are the level of your mind, the level of your nervous system, the level of your emotions, just working with your emotions directly, and then the level of just action taking, specific actions. Like there are certain ways of communicating or resolving conflict or giving affection that when you know to do them and you know how to do them well, you're going to be able to show up as the best partner you can be. So all of this work can be a fair amount, but I've broken it down into simple sequential steps that I guide you through when you come coach with me. And I honestly believe that even if you have gone to couples counseling or are in it currently, or you've done a bunch of personal growth work and you've worked on your relationship as much as you have known to do, if you haven't learned and applied these skills that I've just shared, you have not done all that you can to give your spouse a real chance to be the great partner they could be. You have not done all that you can to give your relationship a real chance to be a great relationship. Because as you grow in these ways, as you develop these skills, it opens the door, it creates the right conditions as never before for your spouse to want to grow and meet you in the ways you've always wanted. It gives him the very best chance to be the collaborative, supportive, loving partner you want. Now, it doesn't always guarantee that your partner will suddenly become the most amazing partner, but it ensures that you've done all you can from your end to give him that chance. So those are the skills to focus on first. That is the most important work you can do to find out and decide whether you want to stay or it's time to go. So if you're serious about doing all you can on your side of the street, absolutely come coach with me. And as I said a few minutes ago, you will also want to communicate what you want from your spouse to him thoroughly, kindly, with belief in him, with a willingness to support him in supporting you in that way, and in a way that sells him on what's in it for him. When you've done your work and you communicate what you want from this place in this way, it's going to really give him the final and biggest chance to show up in a way that would make your marriage one worth staying in, one you want to stay in. So, what does that really mean? I'm going to break those 5 things down for you right now. But first, let me just mention that the point of this conversation is to make sure you are spelling out what you really want from your spouse, what they can do that will make the marriage one you want to stay in, one that you want to be in. I don't think we're always as clear on this as we could be, and we don't articulate it in an effective way to our spouse. We may have a vague idea of it. We may even have a very specific idea of it, but then we communicate it in a way that doesn't get through to our spouse, that doesn't give him a real chance to actually rise up and do what we most want or grow into the spouse we want. We often do it in a way that actually makes them not want to. That shuts them down. I've talked a lot about the backfiring tactics, and oftentimes that's what's happening. We communicate or we show up with our spouse in a way that actually creates the opposite of what we want. and does not motivate them to want to show up in the way that we want. So when you've done your own work, it's much easier to communicate effectively in a way that actually your partner can really hear and wants to respond to, and oftentimes wants to rise up and meet. In other words, makes them much more likely to do what you want and try to stretch themselves and grow into the partner you want them to be. So let's talk about these 5 ingredients that you need to bring to this conversation. So the first one is thoroughly, right? Communicate what you want thoroughly. So again, what I've noticed and what often happens when we women want something and our partners aren't naturally good at giving it to us, like say loving words, we get upset and hurt and frustrated, even though we haven't been explicit and super clear about what we'd like, how we'd like things said, what we'd like said. So often what we do is we complain, or we just state how we aren't happy about how he isn't doing XYZ, how he isn't saying loving things to us. Yeah. What we need to do instead is make a direct and very specific request about what we want, such as, could you please remind me that you love me at least once a day, every day, by the time we turn out the lights, maybe even at that time, at bedtime? That would mean so much to me and help me feel connected to you, which I love. So that was a little example of what you might say to be thorough. So in other words, we need to be clear and thorough in saying exactly what we want, instead of expecting our spouse to know the nuances of our desires or read our mind. The second ingredient is to communicate kindly. This one is really straightforward, but it's not always easy, especially when we're feeling hurt or upset. But we really do want to make sure that when we have this conversation, and ideally the majority of our conversations with our spouse, that we are in our own heart and that we can respect the human that he is, and we can assume the best of him, and we can just be kind. And I know it can absolutely be all too easy to not be so nice with our spouse. So although this sounds straightforward, it can be challenging, but it is essential if we want to give our spouse the real opportunity to really hear what we have to say and to step up and do what we're asking and be the partner we're asking them to be. All right, so the third ingredient here is to communicate during this conversation in a way that shows your belief in your spouse. So this might be totally new to you, but the idea here is you're going to want to believe he can do what you're asking him, that he is capable, even if he's not very good at it right now, that he's capable, that he can grow, that he can learn, that he has it in him. That's what I mean by with belief in him. And you may have to believe all of that about him more than he even does. Because when we believe in other people, it gives them the chance to see themselves in a way that they may never have seen themselves before, and can give them more confidence and courage than they would have without our belief in them. This belief in them, in other words, can be what compels them to try to grow and stretch themselves in ways they didn't even know they were able to before. So to make this a little bit more concrete, let's say the really important thing that you felt like you wanted from your spouse was to show you more love and affection, right? To, like I said before, communicate their love to you in a way that felt more tangible to you. Perhaps your spouse isn't really good at it, feels like he's not a very verbal person, but you can communicate that you know that he is capable, that you believe, as scary as it might be, that he has the capacity to get more comfortable with that. And perhaps even that you've seen him communicate love. Maybe it's to the dog, maybe it's to the kids, right? And so you absolutely know that he has it in him. All right, the fourth piece of this, the fourth ingredient here, is to have this conversation, to communicate in a way that shows that you have a willingness to support him in supporting you. So this just means that on top of you believing your spouse is capable of what you're asking, you let him know that you are there to help him grow in this way, that you want to help make it easier for him to be able to stretch and feel more comfortable doing this thing that you're asking. And I'm going to give you, like I said before, a script that sort of incorporates all of these ingredients in just a minute. So it might become more clear to you exactly what I mean as you listen to me share that in a moment. The fifth ingredient is to sell him or to communicate in a way that sells him on what's in it for him. So people are intrinsically self-oriented, and we are motivated, like it or not, by self-interest. I mean, sure, it can be considered selfish, but our primary job is to take care of ourselves. And so, this is a survival thing. It's part of how we're wired. And you can work with this to help your spouse be motivated to put more into the relationship, to stretch himself in the ways that you're asking or wanting, or do something that really matters to you by helping him see what's in it for him, right? So you just have to spend some time thinking about what is in it for him. Like, how would this benefit him if he were able to do this thing that I'm asking of him? How would that be good for him as well? So maybe, I'm sure there's lots more answers to this. So, but maybe if you want him to say, I love you every day, or communicate his love more verbally, you'd want to think about what is the benefit for him of stretching himself to do that. So perhaps you would see maybe that he gets to know that he has a wife he knows how to make feel great. He's learned how to love his wife in a way that is powerful for her. And he gets to feel proud of himself for that. And the truth is, most men feel really good when they know they are showing up in a way that pleases their wife. So that's one of the things that's in it for him. There probably are many others that you could think of if you really sat down and thought about it. So it's useful to sit down and think about that before you go have this conversation so that you can weave that in, so that you can communicate and help him see that as well. All right, so those are the 5 ingredients to make sure you weave into this conversation. Now, I'm going to give you a sort of script now, an outline of how you can have this conversation using these ingredients. But understand that this isn't in place of the other work I just talked about, the work that you have to do on yourself. This conversation is not the first thing that you want to focus on. Doing your own work is, especially if you know in your heart that there's room for you to grow as a partner. That should be a focus for a while before you have a conversation like this one, because you're going to be surprised at how much will shift from you really doing the only work you can do, which is your own. But after you've done that for a little while, this is a great conversation to have, because of course you want your spouse on board growing your relationship alongside of you. That's a huge sign that this relationship can evolve into something wonderful. So before you would have this conversation that I'm about to outline for you, you'd want to decide on what you want from your spouse, what your partner could do that will make things a lot better. So start with 1 or 2 things, not 20. 20 would be completely overwhelming, right? So maybe it's something simple like listening to you with empathy and kindness when you're upset or even passionate about something, or communicating about something or asking for something instead of reacting defensively, right? That could be a really important thing that could make a huge difference if your spouse was able to do that, yeah? So once you've decided on that, here's one way you can communicate what you want from him thoroughly, kindly, with belief in him, with a willingness to support him in supporting you, and in a way that sells him on what's in it for him. So this is about giving him a chance to really hear what you want and live up to it without threatening. Okay? So this is not like, you do this for me or I'm going to leave you, as sadly can be the common and kind of lazy way to do this. So Don't threaten. Say something like this instead. I've decided that I don't want to live my life without XYZ. So that's where you fill in whatever it is that you want. Like a partner who's able to listen with empathy when I'm upset or passionate about something without defensiveness. Yeah. So that's what you say. You say, I've decided I don't want to live without that. And I want to give you the opportunity to bring that to our relationship. I believe you have it in you because I've seen you do similar things before in the past. And of course, I'm willing to support you in figuring out how to bring that to our relationship. I'm willing to help you if it's hard. I'm here for you in that way. And then you might go on to say, if you don't want to, that's your choice. And even though I will be disappointed, it is fine. But if you want to, that would be amazing. And I believe we'd both be much happier for it. You would feel happy to know you're contributing to a successful marriage. And I want you to be happy. You'd feel good to know you make me happy. I know some of this could be hard for you, or it might not feel like what you naturally want to do. But if you could stretch yourself in this way for me, for our happiness, it would mean so much to me and make both of our lives so much better. Are you willing to do the work it takes to get there? How could I support you in that? All right, so that's it. That's a kind of outline or script of a conversation you can have. And if you haven't had this kind of conversation with your spouse and you haven't used these 5 ingredients, or you haven't been able to because you have things stopping you, honestly, I think most of us are conditioned in such a way that when it comes to intimate relationships, we almost all have things that are stopping us from saying it like this. If we haven't done a really good amount of personal growth work. So if that's going on for you, then do that work to get to a place where you can say this genuinely, with honesty, with true kindness, and even love. The script that I just gave you, that's the easy part. The hard part is actually saying it and meaning it from a place of love, from a place of seeing and believing in both your own goodness and your partner's, and in the goodness that you want for your future. I mean, you don't just want to recite a script for this most important conversation. You want it to come from a genuine place in your own words. And everything behind the script is what's necessary to truly communicate and give your spouse a full chance to step up, to give it their all. So do your work to get there to a place where saying this and using these ingredients and coming from love is possible. And here's the fun thing. When you do your own work in the deeper ways that I've suggested, you may not even have to have this conversation. The truth is, hardly any of my clients end up needing to, because the work they do on themselves changes everything so much for the better. But do have a conversation like this if things aren't changing as you do your own work. Now, the conversation is key to getting a clear answer as to whether this relationship needs to end or has lots of room to grow into something so much more fulfilling and loving. But of course, his response to the conversation matters. His response to what you're asking for is important. So if he says, no, I don't want to do that, or no, I'm not willing to stretch myself, then you have a pretty clear answer. You know that you aren't with someone who's willing to work with you, and ultimately, probably not someone you can really be happy with, unless you can come to the place where you feel that it isn't necessary for him to grow and stretch in those ways, which is definitely a possibility in so many cases. But you may decide that you don't want to be with someone who isn't willing to stretch and grow. if he says, yes, I do want to work on that, I want to stretch and try to do that for you, I recommend that you give it some time. Continue to support him in working on that, and also keep doing your own work. If over time, over weeks or months, he does grow in that way some, you can start asking for the other things that you want as well. But it's kind of proof that he is wanting and able to work towards what matters to you. And again, it's going to be much more likely for him to do that as he sees that you're also working and growing. Now, the thing is, as you do your work, so much of what was aggravating or felt like not enough from him, or the things that used to lead to arguments and discord, won't anymore. And that brings me back to how essential your own work is. So this is the first step to making your marriage a lot better, to figuring out if it's viable for the long term, right? Is doing your own work. And I want to add that I really hesitated to give you this conversation suggestion. I mean, we've had over 180 episodes, and I haven't yet given you this. And that's because I don't want you to go straight to this. I don't want you to skip to having this conversation without having done your own work. That is not giving things a real chance. That is not giving your partner a real chance. If you haven't gone through a deeper process of really looking at yourself and all the ways you're not being the partner you want your spouse to be, and where you're putting responsibility for your emotional life in your partner's hands, and learning how to turn all of that around so you become the emotionally resourced partner who can meet her own needs and love unrestrictedly from a full, deep well. That's the most important work and the first step before you have this conversation. And I know it's easier in the very short term to not do your own work and to focus on having a partner who's just right, or trying to get your partner to be different than he is. But not only is that almost impossible to do, but then you miss out on all the benefits of becoming someone who has learned to live in deep alignment with her values, and becoming who you really want to be, and having done the deep internal work that allows you to have deep self-confidence and the emotional agency and resilience and strength that allow you to do and create anything you set your mind and heart to. Plus, it's a whole lot more work and deeply frustrating and exhausting when you focus on making your spouse change. So I'm sure I'm not the only marriage professional, coach or counselor or therapist who can help you do this work on yourself. But I do know that many people come to me after having gone to one or many counselors or other marriage professionals, and they still have most definitely not done the deep work I'm talking about, the work on themselves I'm talking about. And in fact, counseling often is not focused on this. In fact, I've found that often, not always, of course, it actually exacerbates the focus on getting your spouse to change instead of doing the only work that is really possible for you to do, which is work on your own self. So if you want to hear a little bit more about that, I highly recommend checking out these 2 episodes. So episode 137, it's called Discouraged in Love, 3 Toxic Marriage Myths Causing It. And listen to that one all the way through. That's a really important one that helps bust through some of these ideas we have of like, well, I've done all that I can do from my side. I also have an episode about the differences between marriage coaching and therapy and which one's right for you. That's episode 69. That's a good one to have a listen to as well. And whether you just want to prevent yourself from getting to the place where you are on the fence about whether you want to leave or not, or you are on the fence, I invite you to come coach with me so you can do this work, so you can know that you've done all that you can, so you can leave with peace and integrity and a sense of success instead of failure. Or you find that you don't even want to leave and that there's lots of change and beautiful growth happening and the love and connection is deepening and deepening. Again, the only spots for the next 6 to 9 months to coach with me are going to become unavailable on January 15th. So if you're interested in doing this work with me, absolutely reach out now. Actually, the first step is to fill out the form It's called the Great Mutual Fit Form. I'm putting the direct link to that in the show notes. You can also find it under the Work With Me tab at my website, which is www.hspmarriagecoaching.com. All right, my friends, I hope this has been helpful, helping you get some more clarity about what needs to happen to know whether to stay or go. And may you be oh so well.